Imagine a world where the fate of hundreds of millions of people rests on the decisions of two men, each sitting in their own capital, one in Washington, the other in Moscow. This is not a hypothetical scenario from a Cold War thriller or a political drama series. It is the reality of the world we live in today. The choices made by President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin have the potential to send economic shockwaves across continents, disrupt global supply chains, and even redraw the map of international alliances. Recently, President Trump broke with the diplomatic etiquette that had defined his earlier interactions with Putin. In a highly charged cabinet meeting, he openly voiced his frustrations, declaring that Putin's charm was nothing more than a facade. "He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless," Trump stated, his tone dismissive, highlighting the growing disillusionment with the Russian leader's overtures. Behind the scenes, a brutal war continues in Ukraine, a conflict that has, by some estimates, already claimed the lives of more than 100,000 civilians and soldiers, while driving millions from their homes. The humanitarian toll is staggering, with families torn apart, infrastructure shattered, and entire cities reduced to rubble in the eastern regions of Ukraine. But this story is much more than a personal clash between leaders. It is the latest chapter in a long and complicated saga. A saga defined by rivalry, fleeting moments of hope, and a deep-rooted mistrust between the United States and Russia. To fully understand what is at stake today, we need to look back at the tumultuous history that has shaped these two global powers. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the world watched with cautious optimism. The Iron Curtain had fallen. The United States extended a hand to Russia, supporting its rapid transition from a state-controlled economy to one driven by free market principles and democratic reforms. American advisors poured into Moscow, and billions of dollars in international aid were funneled into Russian institutions. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that decades of hostility could be replaced by partnership. Yet, the optimism faded as quickly as it had blossomed. As NATO expanded eastward, incorporating countries like Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, Russian leaders grew increasingly wary. Many in Moscow viewed this expansion as a betrayal of verbal promises made at the end of the Cold War. Tensions simmered over issues such as the wars in Chechnya, the independence of Kosovo, and the color revolutions in Georgia and Ukraine. By the early 2000s, the relationship had soured, characterized by suspicion and periodic diplomatic skirmishes. The situation reached a boiling point in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and began supporting separatist movements in eastern Ukraine. This bold move triggered the harshest wave of Western sanctions since the days of the Berlin Wall. The United States, joined by the European Union, imposed sweeping restrictions targeting Russia's banking sector, energy exports, and defense industry. The goal was clear: to isolate Moscow, starve it of capital, and force a change in behavior. Moscow, however, was not about to capitulate. Instead, Russian leaders adopted a strategy of adaptation and resilience. They pivoted towards China, India, and other non-Western partners, seeking to build new alliances and diversify their economic ties. Russia began developing alternative financial systems, investing in domestic industries, and creating new trading routes that bypassed traditional Western markets. As Sergei Alexandrovsky, the CEO of Aeroflot, recently explained, "Western sanctions have forced us to rethink everything. Now we must build our own jet engine repair facilities by 2028. The conflict has only intensified since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The world has watched as hacking allegations, election interference, and cyber attacks have become the new front lines of this geopolitical struggle. Sanctions and counter-sanctions have been launched in rapid succession, creating an environment of perpetual hostility and uncertainty. The global economy, already battered by the pandemic, has felt the tremors. Energy markets have been disrupted, food prices have soared, and inflation has returned to haunt economies from Berlin to Buenos Aires. Right now, the stakes are rising once again. President Trump has just approved a significant shipment of defensive weapons to Ukraine, reversing a previous pause that had left Kyiv vulnerable. 10 Patriot missile systems, among the most advanced air defense tools in the world, are being shipped to bolster Ukraine's defenses. Trump has instructed his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to push American defense contractors to accelerate weapons production, stating, "We have to step them up and let them make it at a much higher rate." Across the Atlantic, the European Union is preparing a fresh package of sanctions. But these are not aimed solely at Russia. For the first time, Chinese banks accused of helping Moscow evade restrictions are also in the crosshairs. This marks a significant escalation, a sign that the West is willing to confront not just Russia, but its network of supporters and enablers across the globe. The European Union has announced plans to phase out all Russian oil imports by the end of 2027, a bold move with profound implications for energy markets. David O'Sullivan, the bloc's sanctions envoy, warned recently, Russia has developed increasingly sophisticated networks to evade restrictions. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. The world is watching as the established order crumbles and new alliances take shape. But a pressing question remains. Can this strategy of maximum pressure and isolation truly work? Or will it backfire, leading to unintended consequences that could destabilize the entire global system? Experts are deeply divided. Edward Fishman, a sanctions expert at Columbia University, notes, Trump's approach is to impose pressure to gain leverage, but when it comes to Russia, leverage is a double-edged sword. On one hand, the relentless application of sanctions might eventually force Moscow to the negotiating table, creating an opportunity for peace. On the other, it could drive Russia even deeper into the embrace of China and other non-Western powers, accelerating the fragmentation of the international order. Meanwhile, Ukraine is in a race against time. President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly described the latest wave of American support as critical deliveries that mean saving lives and protecting our cities and villages. The delays and political infighting in Washington, however, have cast a long shadow over Kyiv's hopes for survival. In a move that could redefine the rules of international finance, the United States is even considering using frozen Russian assets to fund a $20 billion loan for Ukraine, a step that, if implemented, could set off legal battles and financial turbulence well beyond Europe's borders. But the risks do not end there. The European Union's plan to wean itself off Russian oil by 2027 faces daunting obstacles. Russia's so-called shadow fleet, an armada of tankers operating under false flags and obscure ownership structures, continues to deliver sanctioned oil to buyers in Asia, the Middle East, and even parts of Europe. Canada recently sanctioned more than 200 ships linked to this shadow fleet, while New Zealand and Australia have expanded their own lists of targeted entities, including individuals and companies allegedly supporting Russia's military efforts. As the economic war escalates, the potential consequences become increasingly severe. Could this pressure campaign trigger a deep recession in Russia, leading to social unrest and even regime change in Moscow? Or is the risk greater that it will backfire, plunging Europe and North America into a new Cold War and shattering the interconnected global economy? To make sense of these possibilities, let's explore three potential futures, each carrying profound implications for Eastern Europe and the broader world order. In the first scenario, the United States and its allies double down on sanctions, targeting every aspect of Russia's economic and technological infrastructure. The Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, currently under debate in Congress, proposes imposing tariffs of 500% on imports from any country that continues to purchase Russian energy. Such measures would be unprecedented in scale and severity. If fully enacted, Russia could find itself facing a catastrophic recession, factories shuttered, unemployment soaring, and the value of the ruble plummeting. Social unrest could erupt as ordinary Russians struggle to afford basic necessities. In this scenario, the Kremlin's political elite might fracture, with factions vying for control and the specter of regime change looming over Moscow. However, there is a significant catch. Russia has become adept at circumventing even the most stringent sanctions. Through a complex web of intermediaries, shell companies, and opaque financial networks, Moscow continues to export oil, gas, and military technology. By forging deeper ties with China, India, and a host of countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, Russia could help build an alternative economic bloc that resists Western pressure. Should this happen, the world could witness the unraveling of decades of globalization. Rival trading blocs would emerge, tariffs would skyrocket, and global supply chains would become fragmented. Prices for key commodities, oil, natural gas, wheat, and fertilizers would rise, with ripple effects felt from Jakarta to Johannesburg. The second scenario is less dramatic but equally complex. A negotiated settlement. Here, Russia and Ukraine, under intense pressure from Washington and Brussels, agree to a ceasefire, however fragile. Such a deal would likely involve phased Russian withdrawals from occupied territories, security guarantees for Ukraine under international supervision, and possibly even a new referendum on the status of contested regions. The West would offer gradual sanctions relief in exchange for concrete steps towards de-escalation. Yet, as United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio cautioned, direct talks are essential for peace, but old wounds do not heal overnight. Even if a deal is reached, deep-seated mistrust would linger. The scars of war, in the form of displaced families, destroyed infrastructure, and psychological trauma, would take generations to heal. Nevertheless, this scenario holds out the hope of renewed cooperation, opening the door to joint efforts on global challenges such as climate change, nuclear proliferation, and pandemic preparedness. The third scenario is the darkest and most dangerous, a prolonged proxy conflict that morphs into a new Cold War. In this future, Russia and the West lock themselves into a years-long struggle, each supporting rival factions in contested regions around the globe. Cyber attacks, information warfare, and diplomatic expulsions become routine. The risk of direct military clashes increases, especially as both sides conduct provocative military exercises and expand their arsenals. Global cooperation on urgent issues, arms control, terrorism, and public health collapses. The international order fractures into hostile camps, reminiscent of the 20th century's most dangerous decades. The consequences would be devastating. Higher military spending would drain resources from social programs, innovation would stagnate, and the world would become less safe and less prosperous for everyone. So why does all this matter to you? Because when superpowers collide, it is ordinary people, the workers, the students, the families, who bear the brunt of the fallout. We have already seen energy prices spike, sending heating and electricity bills soaring in Europe. Food prices have risen sharply as Ukraine's agricultural exports have been disrupted. Inflation has eroded savings and pushed millions into poverty, from Buenos Aires to Berlin. If a global trade war erupts, these pressures could intensify. The cost of living would climb further, investments would become riskier, and job security would decline. In an interconnected world, no country is immune from the ripple effects of great power conflict. For investors, business owners, and anyone thinking about their future, the lesson is clear. Pay close attention to the shifting landscape of global politics. The winners and losers of this economic war will not be determined solely by military might or diplomatic maneuvering. They will be shaped by adaptability, resilience, and the ability to anticipate and respond to sudden changes. Experts advise diversifying assets, building flexible supply chains, and staying alert to political risks that can upend markets overnight. As one seasoned analyst put it, in geopolitics, yesterday's certainty can become today's shock. But what about the effectiveness of sanctions themselves? Can they truly break the will of a determined adversary? Or do they merely inflict suffering on civilians while the powerful adapt and endure? The answer is complicated. History offers mixed lessons. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union maintained limited trade in essential goods, even as they confronted each other across ideological and military lines. Grain deals, scientific exchanges, and cultural diplomacy persisted, demonstrating that total isolation is rarely possible, nor always desirable. In the modern era, the situation is even more complex. Despite sweeping sanctions, Russia has shown remarkable resilience. Its economy has contracted, but not collapsed. The Kremlin has invested heavily in local industries, such as agriculture and high-tech manufacturing, while turning to new partners for everything from microchips to machine tools. The so-called shadow fleet has enabled Russian oil to reach markets in Asia, bypassing Western restrictions. China, meanwhile, has become Russia's indispensable economic ally, supplying critical components, investing in infrastructure, and providing diplomatic cover in international forums. Yet, the West is not standing still. The European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have all introduced new rounds of sanctions in 2025, targeting individuals, companies, and vessels implicated in supporting Russia's war effort. The sanctions have grown more sophisticated, with measures aimed at restricting access to advanced technologies, financial services, and even cultural exports. The United Kingdom has launched legal proceedings to ensure that the proceeds from the sale of Chelsea Football Club, worth more than £2.5 billion, are directed to Ukrainian reconstruction. Canada has sanctioned more than 70 individuals, nearly 40 entities, and over 200 ships connected to Russia's shadow fleet. New Zealand's actions extend to companies accused of shipping North Korean military equipment to Russia. Meanwhile, the United States has spearheaded the effort to use frozen Russian assets as collateral for massive loans to Ukraine. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has confirmed that a $20 billion loan is being finalized, with the Group of Seven backing a $50 billion package. These measures are unprecedented, raising thorny questions about property rights, the sanctity of international contracts, and the potential for retaliation against Western assets abroad. But for all the bold rhetoric and creative sanctions, Adaptation remains the name of the game. Russian oligarchs and business leaders have become masters of evasion, hiding wealth in offshore accounts, using cryptocurrency networks, and exploiting legal loopholes to move money across borders. The result is a high-stakes contest of innovation, agility, and determination. As global tensions rise, some analysts warn of sanctions fatigue, the risk that overuse of these tools will blunt their effectiveness and encourage targeted countries to develop parallel systems. Already, China and Russia are promoting alternatives to the dollar-dominated international financial system, including digital currencies and regional payment platforms. If these efforts gain traction, the West could lose its most powerful lever of influence, with profound implications for the future of global governance. So, as the world stands at this crossroads, what can ordinary citizens do? The answer is not simple, but it starts with staying informed and engaged. Demand accountability from political leaders. Support efforts to promote dialogue and conflict resolution. Advocate for policies that protect the vulnerable and foster international cooperation. Above all, recognize that the choices made in faraway capitals can and will shape the future for generations to come. As we look ahead, the central question remains: will ever-tightening sanctions finally break Russia's resolve? Or will they fracture the global system instead? For now, the outcome is uncertain. Russia has demonstrated formidable resilience, adapting its economy, forging new alliances, and investing in self-sufficiency. The West continues to hope that pressure will bring the Kremlin to the negotiating table. But history teaches us that economic wars, like military ones, are unpredictable and fraught with the risk of miscalculation, backlash, and unintended consequences. Here is a little-known fact. Even at the height of the Cold War, when the world seemed on the brink of nuclear catastrophe, the United States and the Soviet Union found ways to cooperate on crucial issues, sometimes in secret, sometimes publicly. Today, as new blocs emerge and the old order splinters, that lesson is more important than ever. Total isolation is rarely possible. Sanctions may hurt, but adaptation and behind-the-scenes deals often keep the wheels of commerce turning. The world is at a turning point. Whether we move toward a new era of division or find our way back from the brink will depend not just on the decisions of leaders in Washington and Moscow, but on the voices and actions of people everywhere. By demanding accountability, supporting peace, and staying vigilant, we can help shape a future that is safer, more prosperous, and more just for all. If you found this analysis useful, please give us a like, subscribe to our channel,